Tootsie Roll? We're not do. We're not going to do. We can leave it there, but we're not going to do a dedicated time for it. He's wrong. What? But we will. I'll mention it, and then afterwards, if yeah. Yep. Yeah. Good evening. It is good to see you guys tonight. And what we'll do tonight, let me just kind of clarify a little bit. We're going to jump right into it and kind of begin our discussion. And we're not going to have normal songs, but we do have the Lord's Supper available afterwards. If anybody needs to take the Lord's Supper tonight, then you can find one of us afterwards, or you can just grab it afterwards. I'm going to open us with prayer, and then we'll start. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for another day of life. You have blessed us and blessed us far beyond what we deserve. And it seems like all the time we're navigating difficult and controversial issues, and sometimes we feel out of place as Christians. And so, God, I just pray that we might take seriously the call to not be conformed to the pattern of the world, but to be transformed. Help our thinking to be in line with you and not to be more influenced by popular culture. And so, Lord, I pray you give us wisdom. Help us to clearly present some of the things that we've planned on presenting tonight. And Lord, I pray that through our spirit, through our content, that you might be glorified and honored. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let me mention, as we start, we not sure time. Obviously, we'd like for participation at some point. We'll try to do that. And so, we want to handle this. One way we want to kind of begin this conversation about abortion specifically is we have this foundation. And the foundation, Matt's going to chime in. The foundation is, when does life begin? That's the most fundamental question with this. And so our proposition, I think backed by Scripture, is that life begins at conception. That's our proposition. And that, I don't believe that's argued in science. It's argued less and less in science, actually.
It has traditionally been for a long, long time. Obviously, especially in the 1960s, we had the sexual revolution, right? And the whole free love thing became a thing. And obviously, the result of that is lots and lots and lots of pregnancies. And since that time, we've started using language to hide the humanity of unborn children. Words like fetus and zygote and embryo, those just used to be stages of development in a baby, and then suddenly they became other than a baby. It's a way to distance ourselves from the horror of what we're actually doing. But yeah, scientifically, science has caught up to what the Bible has been saying. It used to be that you sounded like a lunatic and you sounded anti-scientific if you said that an unborn baby is a baby. And now the opposite is true. Right. You're the science denier if you try to say life doesn't begin.
And I've seen enough ultrasounds to know.
Right.
I mean, I'm up there with Sherry with how many ultrasounds I've seen, and so we do have this amazing technology that's shown us something about the complexity of life at early stages. And we see this not only this individuality, but this separation. We see development in a baby very early, and not just scientific, but we think we have a biblical platform, right?
Yeah.
Whether it is, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, or you knit me together in my mother's womb. And so not only is this important, because life begins at conception, but human life is different than any other life, because human life human beings have a soul that distinguishes us from the animal kingdom. I mean, if we're talking about a pregnant deer, it's not the same conversation. Because human life is intrinsically more valuable because we're made in the image of God.
Right. Yeah, and there's various scriptures, right? I mean, if a human baby is a baby from the time they're conceived, thou shalt not murder covers the issue. Right. You can't kill another human being. They have the same rights and protections as we do. And so that's kind of where we need to point people. Well, that's why Heartbeat is doing these ultrasounds, because once somebody sees, they're like, oh, you've had various these abortion doctors come out and talk about, when they perform that procedure. I know the one woman, said, when I felt that what happens under those forceps, she said, there's no doubt what's happening. It's a sharp line that you've crossed. And so this is something that we know. There's a reason why people want to bury this in euphemisms, because they're uncomfortable with the idea of killing a human baby for good reason. We know what's happening, and people don't want to think about that.
And it's for that reason that we as Christians are strong defenders of life. Right? If Christianity is defined by a word, it's defined by the word life. That is a pretty all-encompassing term, but I think it's one of the most predominant words to describe. So we are strong defenders of life because God is pro-life, and because otherwise we also believe that there's a nobility in defending the innocent, those that can't speak for themselves. So, from the outset, we establish our foundation. Life begins at conception. Human beings are unique and have an eternal soul. But we as a church, and I speak for our whole leadership, we are unapologetically pro-life, 100%. And we don't waver on that. We're not ashamed of that. And I think that's important for anybody that's a member here, involved here, to know that we are unashamedly, unapologetically pro-life.
And it's strange. It's been strange for me to watch this. I've tried to research some of this, especially because we've taught our teenagers about these issues, and it's been odd to see the argument shift in real time amongst people who support this, because less and less are they able to say that's not a baby. They're being forced to admit that it is. You got people coming right out and saying, yes, that is a baby, but a woman should be allowed to kill the baby anyway. And if that sounds icky to you, it's because it is. Bill Maher was one of those guys, came out and said, look, there's no doubt in my mind that that's a human life, but human life isn't always sacred. That's the new position that's being taken. And even doctors are saying this sort of thing. And so I think it's important for us to be able to have the confidence to know at this point, do a little bit of research. The science is on our side. And talk to anybody who's worked with Heartbeat or any of these agencies. We can point you to some resources here at the end of this. Science is on our side that life begins at conception.
Yeah. So Matt will touch on this a little bit. The argument and the tone of the argument shifted with Darwin and the introduction of evolution. So we moved from talking universally as a people about the sanctity of life to evolution brought in talking about quality of life. And that became so predominant, in that, and you add to that, the idea of whatever eugenics are involved in that. And I don't know, Matt, you want to kind of touch on some of the eugenics behind the abortion movement?
Some of you have heard about Margaret Sanger, who kind of started this whole mess with Planned Parenthood. Her stated goal was to lessen minority populations in our country. That's what she wanted to do. They explicitly marketed abortion to black people, to minorities in the country, because they knew that they were easily swayed by this. They didn't have the resources always to support a child. And their thought was, we'll get rid of them this way, right? We can't get them out of the country. We'll just lessen their birth rates until they sort of breed themselves out. And that sounds ugly because it is ugly. And that is the essence of eugenics. We're going to manipulate the human race through genetics in order to get us where we want to be.
And this is true of genetic disorders, Down syndrome.
Absolutely, Down syndrome. Yeah, you'll be told, have an abortion because your child shouldn't be born with this disorder. And their idea is, if we eliminate the weak, then the human race will be stronger for it. You take those people out of the breeding pool, we become better, right? More evolved is their idea. Now, if we're just jumped up animals, they're right. But if we have a soul and we're created by God, then that's evil. It's evil to kill people because they're weaker than us, or because we perceive that they are, or because we've decided that their life isn't worth living. And my goodness, you want to talk about a slippery slope. We've taken a whole swath of the population, unborn children, and said they're less than human. And if we deem for any reason whatsoever that they're inconvenient, or that they're not going to have a good life, or that they're a burden, we can get rid of them, no questions asked. What happens when we do that with the elderly? What happens when we do that with just anybody who's not contributing to society? Well, they're only as good as what they can provide to society. They're a burden. Get rid of them. They literally are putting, I think, what country was it? They just put one of these suicide pods out.
Oh, Canada, wasn't it?
And somebody successfully used it to kill themselves. Now the government there is stepping in. I want to say it's like Sweden or somewhere like that, but the problem isn't that someone killed themselves in a suicide pod. The problem is that they didn't have the correct permits or something. It's some sort of red tape issue. Canada is absolutely doing medical assistance in dying. If you have any condition that you can't find a satisfactory solution for, including depression, anxiety, you can apply to be put down like a dog by your physician, and they will do it. That's not conspiracy stuff. That's a real life thing. You can look it up. That's terrifying.
And especially for those of us that believe life is sacred. And that's one reason we, want to have conversations like this, and why this is an appropriate setting to do that is life is sacred. And we ought to defend the cause of the weak and the vulnerable. And so I think it's vital that we be concerned, because there is a slippery slope. I know people don't like the slippery slope argument, but what happens when we become inconvenient to society? What happens when that shifts from the unborn to Christians or whatever else? And so, but make no mistake, this is a natural, logical path, destination of where evolution has to take people. To the devaluing of life, to the treating of human beings like animals, and that's where we arrive. And that's why I'd mark Darwin's organizing of evolutionary thought as one of the major turning points in Western civilization. So another thing is we hear the questions, right? You hear the questions then, and anytime there's like an argument for something, there's all these what ifs or yeah buts that we have, and these become prominent in political circles. About how they might put parameters around abortion or whatever else. Things like the common exceptions that we hear. You might hear someone say, I'm against abortion except in cases of rape, incest, and the mother's life. And so I think it's at least good. I'd like to talk about that just a little bit. How we feel with those exceptions. We'll elaborate on this. I'll lay the field and then make you clean up my mess. But the ground is if life begins at conception and it's wrong to murder, that doesn't give, no matter how much it pulls on our heartstrings, it doesn't give us the right to commit murder. It doesn't make that life trivial or less valuable, even if it was conceived in a bad thing like rape or incest, and I understand the complexities, the emotional stuff with that. And by the way, like the numbers are like 0.001%, right? This is not most abortions are for convenience sake, right?
And that's not making the argument that if the percentage is higher, we'd be okay with it. It still would not be okay. The point there is, people who bring this up are being dishonest. What they want to say is because these abortions are okay, all abortions should be okay. And that's obviously not the case at all.
And they want to make us seem like we're just cruel for a position like that. We're gonna force a woman to carry a baby that she doesn't want to have, that was conceived against her will, that's dangerous to her. And you hear these things, right? Like, they're going to go back to, because Roe versus Wade got overturned, we're going to go back to having abortions in back alleys with coat hangers. like those type of conversations. You all have heard things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I have the guy's name here. Let me find it. There was one guy in particular who came up with that argument. Hold on. You talk for a second while I find
Yeah,
it.
and so the exceptions are geared to pull on our heartstrings. That's what they're geared to do. And I can empathize with difficult scenarios, difficult what-if scenarios. What if the mother's life is in danger? I understand the difficulty that's there. But a lot of these arguments are dishonest. I've heard just in this election cycle, people say now that Roe versus Wade's overturned, women can't get any health care, which is interesting. Abortion's called reproductive rights or health care because it's certainly not health care. It's not caring for health. It is a violation of a doctor's Hippocratic oath. So those are certainly things that we bring to the equation as well.
Oh, sure. It's interesting, abortion's considered a medical procedure, but it's the only one where if the patient survives, you did it wrong, right? I mean, you do a knee replacement surgery, you expect the patient to live through that. The whole point of an abortion is to end a life. That's not medicine. By definition, that's not health care whatsoever. But it's a bait and switch, right? You don't want to say, I want to deny women health care. And so if they label abortion health care, it takes away our ability to oppose it without sounding like lunatics, which is exactly the point of that. And it's also a dangerous procedure, right? There's this lie that abortion is super safe. It isn't. It's incredibly dangerous. I think maybe 1 out of 20, I'm trying to think what the number is, there's a really high percentage of women who have an abortion who experience some sort of serious complications from that. Hemorrhaging, amniotic fluid embolisms, there's a lot of bad stuff that can go wrong. And I'm talking in an abortion clinic, not in some back alley, chop shop or whatever. This is a standard abortion, incredibly dangerous. And the stats show that women who have an abortion are like 81% more likely to have mental health issues afterwards. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse. This is incredibly traumatic, which is part of the problem with the idea that someone who's been brutalized and attacked and assaulted, that you're somehow going to heal that by letting them have an abortion. You're re-traumatizing that person. You're just adding another problem on top of the one that they've already had.
And we'll talk at the end about some of the other ways that this can be dealt with and some other maybe practical things. But I have no problem with being 100% pro-life.
No, and
I'm not moved to think somebody's compassionate because they throw in the exception clauses with it. The foundation's still there. It's a life. It's a life, and it's not good. It's not moral. It's not just to take that life in any we do not have the right to play God.
Yeah.
To determine that. And that's true in the rare instance of a mother's life being in danger. We don't have that right to kill a life to save another. That's not our decision.
No. I watched an interview, not an interview, this woman was speaking. They had 2 women speaking at this event. One who had nearly had an abortion and chosen not to. She gave her child up for adoption, and the other had an abortion. And the girl who had an abortion, she had since really struggled with guilt and depression over that. And she said, nobody warned me one time that I was going to be adding another anniversary to my calendar. She said every year on the anniversary of her having been raped, she had to remember that. And she was told that this would somehow heal her of that memory. Instead, now she had to remember the day that she had taken the life of her child. You ask a woman who's had an abortion, they don't forget the day. They can tell you the date that it happened, because it's traumatic. And she said, now, every time it's the anniversary of my abortion, it makes me think of the time I was raped. And every time it's the anniversary of the rape, I have to think about the abortion. And now she's got both of these things that she has to live with. And it's really a difficult thing. And she since has become a Christian and repented of that. And let's just say right now, if you're sitting out here and you're listening or you're listening online and you've had an abortion, we're not throwing you away. There's repentance and healing to be found for that in Christ. There absolutely is. You don't have to live under the crippling guilt of that. You can be healed of that. And so let's just get that out. We're not attacking you. Sadly, we've been brought up in a system that's taught us that this is okay.
But we are attacking a system.
We are.
And the system, I believe, is it has demonic value to it. You guys ever see, like, after that the Supreme Court made a decision to overturn Roe? Did you see the response of pro-choice people? They lost their minds. They lost their minds in a way that seems like an inconsistent response to what was actually done. And then the lies. This has been the hill that the left has chosen to die on. It's been a hill that they've chosen to make an ultimate their banner that they wave, and it's reminiscent of offering children to the god Molech. I just think what we've done is we've rebranded it just a little bit. I don't believe for one instant that this is merely a physical argument, a black and white argument, a science argument. I think this is a spiritual argument, and it has, our battle's not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil. So I absolutely believe that there is an evil influence that's behind that, and just the way they can proudly devalue and dehumanize and make it their life's mission to promote the taking of an innocent life. And by the way, in such violence, this is not neat. Like Matt was saying, it's not safe. It's not neat. It's not. It is a violent thing. And just from everything from the disregard for the human body, taking body parts of an aborted baby and discarding them or using them in other ways, that it should bother us as people, and I think this is part of it.
Well, a lot of these idolatrous cultures have practiced human sacrifice, especially of children in the past, like you were mentioning about Moloch and some of these other things. If there's a sacrament to the secular humanist movement, abortion is it. Right? You can see the religious zeal that they attack anyone who comes after abortion. And it's really crazy. You've got this movement of these women who stand up, and it's like this shout your abortion thing. Like, I'm going to celebrate that I had an abortion because here's the benefit that I got from it. When has that not been the case, that you sacrifice something to your God for some benefit, right? That's always been the reason that these children were offered. And I don't think that's any, Sally Field just stood up the other day, talked about this abortion that she had in some clinic in Mexico and how she still felt ashamed about it, not for the reasons that you'd expect, but her rationalization was, 2 months later, I was Gidget, like I got cast as I became a movie star, and so it was all worth it. So you sacrificed your child for success and fame. That seems weird to me, and I don't want to make more of it than it is, but the idea that since Roe v. Wade was passed, over 60 million babies have been slaughtered, that's demonic. There's something spiritual behind that. I did find the name I was looking for. A guy named Bernard Nathanson. He was an abortionist, and when they were pushing to break the abortion law to get Roe v. Wade passed, he has come out since and flat out admitted, we made up this number. 10,000 women a year dying in back alley abortions. It was never true. As a matter of fact, most abortions that were performed back then were legal. They were no safer than the ones that are performed today, which again are not safe. And he flat out lied about that, and they pushed this so hard into the national consciousness that this became stuck in people's brains, and they still say it. We're going to go back to 10,000 women a year dying in back alley abortions, and that is one of the reasons people will defend keeping it legal, and yet it was never true. It's a lie. We're talking about this, the exceptions for rape and incest. I wanted to play this quick video clip, and then we can kind of come back and spring off of some of that, because there's a woman who they interviewed her. She was her mother was raped when she was 11 years old, had a child at 12, and kept the child. And I just think it's a really good clip for us to kind of watch. And she mentioned some of these things that we're talking about. So, actually, Sharon, can you double click on that? Thank you.
radio show host,
mother of two.
Kathy Barnett.
Kathy Barnett. Kathy, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. What do you think of this?
My name is Kathy Barnett. I grew up in southern Alabama, very rural, one-stop sign town called Nichburg. Getting ready to go to college, I decided to go into the Army Reserves. But I had to go get my birth certificate, mainly because the name was different. The name I had always grown up with was Nelson, but then come to find out there was something completely different on my birth certificate. Clearly, I could have done the math and realized just how young my mother was when she gave birth to me, but it was never something that truly resonated with me until I looked at my birth certificate for the very first time and just kind of studied it. Her gender, they called her a Negro girl, and that was the first thing I saw, and it just kind of grabbed my heart. But then I saw her age, and she was 12. And that just really struck a chord in me because I realized just how young my mother was when something so horrible had visited upon her. Even to this day, it's a very hard word to say, but my mother was raped. Given her young age, at 11 years old, my father being 21.
They was hurt. We was all devastated. But my mother said, you know, you're pregnant, so we're gonna get through this. And she helped me get through it. I don't want to use the word choice. She was gonna be born. I didn't have a choice to say, you're gonna live, or I'm going to abort you. That wasn't a choice for me. And I thank God it wasn't a choice for me.
As a child, I knew no difference. I was loved, and I felt loved. It gave me a greater appreciation for my mother. It helped me to forgive a lot of the mistakes someone at that age, having gone through such trauma, would have made in their own parenting. But it definitely made me become very adamant about the sanctity of life, of all life, regardless of their conception, regardless of how they arrived, that I am invaluable, I'm worthy, and my life has purpose. Before the foundation of the world, God saw me and he decided that I would be, and he said in his word that not only did I see you, but I called you, I predestined you. And so as a Christian, I believe in the value of life, that when I was in my mother's womb, he was knitting me together. Even among Christians, even among staunch conservatives, an exception to the rule of being pro-life for many is in the case of rape. And yet my life has value. From me has come two very beautiful and charming and smart kids, married to a wonderful husband. We've made a life for ourselves, and none of this would have happened if the exception to the rule had applied.
Regardless of how old you are and how the child was conceived, that child deserved a chance. And if I had made that choice, where would I be at right now without my daughter?
The hardest struggle for my mother, the hardest thing for her to overcome, I think is just the effects of the trauma itself. And that is why I think it's so important to help people understand that the trauma has already been inflicted. The child should not be inflicted with the consequences that squarely belongs on the one who inflicted the trauma. You have to be able to see the difference. Aborting me would not have eased the trauma that my mother suffered. Aborting me would not have allowed me to be in a place today where I can now take care of my mother.
It's just amazing to see them grow up. Regardless of how my life started out, I'm blessed.
I'm not left with bitterness. I'm left with overwhelming sense of gratitude. That not only did God see value in my life, but that my family saw value in my life. I'm very grateful for that. I'm eternally grateful that they chose to allow me to be born.
I think it's interesting. She mentioned, that why would we visit the consequences on the child that the father deserves? And even our culture wouldn't let us do to the father what we're allowed to do to the child. If a woman's raped and becomes pregnant, if she were to pay someone to hunt down and dismember that guy, she would go to prison for that. We might not want to convict her, but she would, right? That would be a crime, and yet she can do that to this innocent child. And we've got to break through this stigma that you've got this woman who is a victim and this animal that's attacked her, but then that this baby is another adversary. That baby is a second victim. We got to love both victims, I think, is what we need to be doing.
And it goes to not only the value of life, but children are a blessing from the Lord. Regardless of whatever other things are attached to that, we've gotten away from that as a guy with 7 kids. There's people that look at me like I'm nuts. What in the world do you do? It's crazy. I know it's crazy, but at the same time, children are a blessing, and I think that one of the things that we need in our language, we need to be, because our language has implications. And one of those is that a child is an inconvenience or a burden. And children are blessings from the Lord. They're a sign of his favor. I'm very favored. And I have to tell myself that sometimes. But I'm very favored in that. And children are a blessing. And that life does not become less life because it was the product of rape. It doesn't become less of a blessing in those instances. It's still true. And that child still has value. And I would add, with a child born with a disability, or they're not less life or less human. And so
I think it's interesting too, like if we think about, yes, a child can be a burden. That's one of the arguments that's made. I can't support the child. We don't have the resources. It would be too onerous for you to take on a child at this time in your life. But it's not just you're a person and that child is a separate person, and how should they get to demand this of you? You're that child's parent. I think that relationship matters. We pass over that sometimes and we just argue the humanity of the child, but also you're the child's mother, right? And so if a woman called the police and she said, listen, I've got these invaders in my house and they're eating all my food and breaking my stuff and they're tearing my house apart and they won't leave, right? And the cops showed up and it's a bunch of dudes have broken into her house, they're going to arrest those guys. But if they show up and it's the woman's children she's called the police about, it's going to be a different response. Our children have a right to demand those things of us, even if they're inconvenient. And at the second you become pregnant, there is a child. You are that child's parent. This goes for fathers too, by the way. You have a responsibility to that child. They're not some stranger making demands of you. They're your child, and that should matter to us. I think the mother's life is a big one, right? I think there's some misunderstandings there about that. There's far fewer of these cases than we're told that there are. It's not even just the number of cases are small where the mother's life is in danger. It's that the question is, if the mother's life is in danger, is the deliberate killing of the child the only way to help her? So, I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, in a lot of those instances where they would say the mother's life is in danger, the child's life is in danger.
Correct.
Right? And whether that is like from an ectopic pregnancy or some other issue. And really, and most of those, many of those instances, it's not really an either or decision, right? It's not kill the baby to save the mother. That's
which is what we're told, right?
It's that there's something atypical, and the baby may or may not be viable. I don't know.
It's weird, and a lot of the like sometimes you got these severe cases of like preeclampsia, for example. The mother's blood pressure shooting through the roof. It can be dangerous for her. The comparison I've read is that killing the child because of preeclampsia is like cutting your head off because you have a migraine, right? You can treat that. And so if we recognize that the woman is a valuable human life and the child's a valuable human life, what we would try to do is treat these conditions in a way that saves both. That's medicine. That's what medicine looks like. We don't just proactively kill the one to avoid the risk to the other, because that's not how we practice medicine. And in the cases of things like, they'll push this in cases of cancer. Let's say the mother's diagnosed with some sort of aggressive cancer and they're saying we have to start chemo now. but the baby can't survive the chemo probably, and so what we need to do is have an abortion so that we can start you on cancer treatment, which is crazy because you're saying, well, the baby can't survive the chemo, so what we're going to have to do is kill the baby so that we can give you the chemo. Give her the chemo, right? You're trying to save the mother. If the child dies, right, that's an unforeseen, it's an unintended consequence of trying to save the mother. That's not an abortion. That's you're trying to save the mother and the child didn't make it, right? Ectopic pregnancy, that child can't survive that. Soon as that child implants outside the uterus, they're as good as dead. They cannot be reimplanted in a safe place. They cannot be removed from the mother's body. The child is going to die. The question is, are you going to let the mother die too or not? That's not an abortion, right? And in an abortion, the primary intention is to kill that child. In one of these other interventions, the goal is to preserve whichever life you can, or both if possible. And sometimes that's not possible. But that is not the same thing as having an abortion.
Absolutely. So a couple quick hitters. What about my body, my choice? You hear that? My body, my choice.
Yeah. I've heard that my right to swing my fists ends at the tip of your nose, right? I mean, I'm allowed to swing my arm around all I want until I hit somebody with it, and now it's a crime. I'm not allowed to do that. There's all kinds of laws that limit what we're allowed to do with our bodies. I'm not allowed to inject heroin into my body. I'm not allowed to use my body to run over somebody, no matter how terrible a driver they are, right? There's all kinds of stuff we're not allowed to do with our bodies. And as it happens, when you have an abortion, it's not your body that's being dismembered.
There's a fundamental there's a separate human being. That's true with DNA. It's true with their individuality, and personality even. So, the argument's not even a baby in its mother's womb is not, it's in their body, but it's not their body. What about Matt? We've heard that in vaccines, many of the vaccines, there's aborted fetal cells, which is true. That's not like a conspiracy. That's true. What is our stance? How do we deal with that as people who live in a world where we're not anti-vaxxers? But how do we deal with the possibility that we've been injected with vaccines with aborted fetal cells?
I mean, there's nothing to do about it once you've had the vaccine, right? I mean, you can't do anything about that. What I think we need to do is, for one, I don't think we throw away all of our. I don't want to wade too far into vaccine territory. There are some problems with our vaccines. I'm not an anti-vax person. I do think there are some issues that need to be resolved with our vaccines, for sure. There are problems with them. This is one of the big ones. There are other places to get stem cells. We do not have to use aborted fetal tissue to get that. And quite frankly, if that's the only place to get what we need to make vaccines, maybe we don't need those particular vaccines. And we would see the truth of that if someone came to us with a proposal that said, hey, we could come up with a vaccine that cures cancer right now, but what we're going to have to do is go into this nursery with a flamethrower and take out 100 babies. Who's signing on for that? None of us would. None of us would say it's okay to kill this 1-month-old child to get a vaccine out of their tissue. And so it's the same question. Is the child or aren't they a child? And I think probably we need to go after that because that is a reason why this industry is continuing to thrive.
And some of my issue with that is a view of what the human body is. To say, for Christians to say that this is just a body, that our body doesn't matter, that's bad theology. Our body matters. We are not just a soul that happens to have a body. We are a body and a soul. And that body is a part of God's redemptive plan. It's going to one day be resurrected. And incidentally, I believe that aborted children who have a soul are also going to be resurrected when Jesus returns. I think it's, I think we should value the human body, honor God with your body. And I think a part of that, not only is it our view of abortion and life, but our view of the human body is in play with that.
Plus, there's a very shady industry that's behind all of this, right? I mean, there's been different stings and exposés done about some of these back alley deals that are being done, illegally selling fetal tissue for medical experimentation. There's a lot of ugly stuff that goes into this. And as long as this industry is allowed to thrive, then those things are going to continue to happen. And so I don't know, we don't have a pat answer, like, can you refuse to take, most of us don't know what even's in our vaccines, right? If I ask you, what's in that vaccine, you just took, you don't know. I'm not suggesting that you're a sinner because you got a vaccine that was developed with fetal tissue. How would you have known that, right? I do think what we need to do is do a better job of shining a light on that and making that an illegal process.
I had a doctor tell me, they were talking about this whole process where they take an aborted fetal cell, they attach a virus, a small dose of virus to it, they inject it in you, and they don't mark with that whether that fetal cell was male or female, and then they inject it into somebody, so by the time you're 12, 13 years old, you've had 160 vaccines or however many that whatever that load is, and they suggested they think some of the gender issues might be that we're injecting boys with 100+ hormone laced tissue. That's theory. I can't. Someone might be able to debunk that, but there are issues with it. That's what there's issues that we might have to think about. Matt, what about, I'll let you do it. What about the morning after pill?
Yeah, I actually, the morning after pill is pretty cut and dry. I mean, it's an abortion pill, is what it is.
Yeah.
So if we're going to be consistent, I've actually, there's a book I'll suggest toward the end. It kind of got me thinking about some of this stuff. I never thought much about birth control in this conversation, or even like in vitro and things like this. But if we're going to be consistent in our position that life begins at conception, we need to be very discerning about what birth control does and how it works, right? And so my thought is any birth control that stops you from conceiving, I'm probably okay with that personally, right? But at the point where you have conceived, right, you've got an implanted egg that is now a new life, and you take a pill that keeps that life from implanting, that's an abortion, right? If you create a bunch of embryos that you later throw away and destroy, that's 10 abortions you've just committed, right? So those are the kinds of questions we need to ask. And I can't blanket say no birth control. We're not Catholic. But
And we're not against contraceptives.
Correct. But if what you're doing is killing a new life, then that would be, yes, Brenda. Yeah, that's right. And nobody was ever told that, right? No.
And they don't know. They don't know. If you were to ask your doctor, does this do?
Okay, yeah, they just don't bring it up, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a quote from a guy named Jerome Lejeune. He's called the father of modern genetics. He said, "The fact that after fertilization has taken place, a new human has come into being is no longer a matter of taste or opinion. It's a plain experimental evidence." And so, yeah, science knows this. They know. You're right, they know. But we're not told those things. And so, again, I'm not going to stand here and say, if you've taken birth control, you're a horrible sinner. I don't think that. But I do think that we need to think about these things differently. If life begins at conception, what does that mean? And I think we need to be able to discern, what are we doing? If you're taking a morning after pill, that's nicknamed the abortion pill. That there's no even gray area to that. But in vitro is a big thing, and that's hard, man, because it breaks people who want to have a child and can't. It's horrible, it's heartbreaking. It's a terrible situation, and you're trying to have the child, and you have several unsuccessful attempts, But I think what is the hang up for me that I never thought of before I started looking into this again is, okay, so you're going to create 10 embryos in the hope that one of them takes, right? One of them survives the pregnancy. What do you do with the other 9? And if life begins at conception, how is that functionally different
Yeah.
from an abortion? And so I think that's where the problem lies. What are we doing with these embryos that we're creating? That's something we got to think about. Those are some of the nuances that we have to consider when we're having these conversations.
And those are nuanced, you know, and more difficult for me than the rape, incest, mother's life.
Correct.
You know, that's even more complicated, more gray. So shift gears just a little bit. This is where we'll end up in trouble. How does this overlap with politics? And should we, as Christians, be one-issue voters? Is this a deal breaker for us with a candidate that is pro-life? Now, look, this is where I know where it's sticky for some. There's a clear platform, right? There's clear platforms laid out in our two-party system. One has made very clear that they are pro-abortion up to, and maybe even in some cases, after the 9th month. Right? That is a part of the party platform of one of our major political systems. For me, and I'll let Matt answer because he might have a different. For me, if any person ever says that they are in favor of abortion completely, with no exceptions, I will not, zero chance will I vote for that person. That's my conviction. I'm not saying that ultimately has to be your conviction, but I cannot do that. Now if you've been watching, there's been a shift even on both sides on this. I think maybe for political reasons that's been the case. The argument's different. I would even suggest just, the executive branch can't, aside from appointing judges, isn't legislating abortion law. They do have the power of veto and other things, but I look at a couple. I look at their rhetoric, what they say, what they've done on abortion, and I also consider the type of judges they'll appoint to federal and Supreme Court positions. Those are issues that I look at heavily when I decide that.
No, I definitely would consider that heavily. It's tempting for us to be cynical about this. You mentioned this during your sermon this morning that nothing ever seems to change. I think even the most outspoken ones of these politicians really like having that issue to campaign on, right? And so it doesn't really behoove them to do anything about it, because then they can keep promising to do something about it, and we'll keep electing them in the hopes that they'll do something about it. But if someone's openly standing up and saying, I think that you ought to be able to have an abortion right up to the moment of birth, that's crazy to me. I mean, I don't know how you do vote for someone, because either that person is wicked or that person is incredibly deluded as to what they are saying. When you've got what's his face from Virginia talking about, if the baby survives the abortion attempt, you lay him on a table and have a conversation about what you're going to do, whether to provide medical care. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's an actual thing that this guy said. There's been all this stuff about Tim Walz, that he canceled he basically got rid of a law that required them to provide medical care to a child that survived an abortion attempt. And he's trying to deny that, but that is exactly what the law said, and that's exactly the law that he got rid of. And so, I don't know how I could vote for someone who stands for that sort of thing.
And it's strange, like these politicians, I don't know what my TV thinks I am, but I get these ads for these raging liberals all the time. Like, it's all I see. And they're like, this guy is pro-life. You shouldn't, dun, dun, dun. And I'm like, is this supposed to be for or against the guy? Right. For me, and they'll go in and almost like, and this is liberalism. This is how liberalism works. You are dumb if you believe that. With very little defense of their position, no reasonable person thinks, and that's how they try to phrase a lot of the arguments we're dealing with socially, is if you believe that life begins, if you don't believe in reproductive rights, you just, man, that's ridiculous. It'll make headline news. Some Hollywood actor comes out and says they're pro-life, like it's a crazy outlier position that they are.
Which is nuts. And honestly, as Christian people, we know this, right? I mean, if even if they're totally aligned with all the other stuff that we like, if somebody came out campaigning and they were like, listen, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, and it's all the things that you could ever ask for. But the downside is about once a month I'm going to head over to the orphanage and kill me a baby, right? Like, we would not vote for that person. Right. We'd be like, no, that's the lunatic. You need to put them in an institution because they're a crazy person. And so I don't think it's totally out of the question for this to be a deal breaker.
And we
it's
do
not the only one.
We do
right?
this election. We do have two candidates with a record, right? We have two candidates with a track record on what they've done with abortion. I'm not getting into it endorsements and rhetoric aside on the campaign trail. One has advocated for, promoted what they would call reproductive rights, and one made it their goal to appoint conservative judges. And I think there's something that, show me what you do, and you should believe someone the first time.
Yeah. I know you mentioned the judges that are going to be. I tend to think if we're going to get this done for real, if we're going to get rid of abortion, I think it is going to be the legislature, because I think the only way forward at this point, you got different states passing different abortion laws. The only way we get rid of abortion is that we have to establish the humanity of that child the second they're conceived. Like, a life at conception amendment to the Constitution immediately provides them all the same protections that you or I have. And I think that's our only plausible scenario where we get rid of this once and for all. And so, yeah, man, the presidential election's pretty important, but our Senate and our House of Representatives elections may be more important than that when it comes to this issue. That's just my opinion.
And even now, state legislatures, what they're doing, this is a state issue.
No. It is. But if they federally were to provide that right, life at conception sort of thing, it would supersede those.
Which both candidates have said they would veto.
Correct, they have. So, but I guess in this case, what we have to, we got an openly pro-abortion extreme candidate and one that's a little softer on it that we might like. So I guess the question we ask is, which one's going to enact policies that result in fewer abortions? Right?
And like I said, both have a track record.
Correct.
And I'm kind of under the assumption, maybe wrong, that one's grown softer on the issue for political gain, maybe less than ideology.
So, all right, we got this Christian stance that we're laying out, that life of innocent children, and we're not going to spend time on this, but anyone who says, well, life's sacred, what about the death penalty? I think I'm okay with killing criminals who kill people. I think we should not kill babies who have not killed people. I think that's pretty consistent logically. But so we're saying the life of innocent children is sacrosanct and we should protect it in every case, right? There is no, it's okay to kill a baby when, right? Can't complete that sentence in a way that doesn't sound insane. And so what about these people who say, well, how many of you adopted then? You don't get to say, all you care about is till they're born, right? And then you don't care.
Yeah, I do think that Christians need to be vocal advocates of adoption. And whether that means a couple of things is law that's passed that makes adoption more affordable, and second, a willingness for us to open up our homes when we might not have planned on that. Yeah. So I absolutely believe that the church should lead the way with not just preaching anti-abortion but pro-adoption, which we don't do enough. We don't preach enough. That I think that is meaning. I think some of you are like, man, we didn't want more kids. Well, it's life or death, man. Yeah. It's not about you. And adopt a child. And there are cases where someone might consider if you would adopt the child, they might consider not having an abortion. Right. The early church was involved in this. By the way, there's precedent for that. One of the main missions of the early church, I'm talking first century, was scouring the fields to find children that they would have children that were born. I even read there's this one letter I can give you that from a soldier, a Roman soldier in the first century, to his wife, and said, if it's a boy, that's great, let him live. If it's a girl, take him out into the field and leave it. And the early church was bothered by this and made it their mission. They would go out regularly into the places where people would dump and discard their babies to die of exposure. They would take them and they would raise them And the church has always been pro-orphanage, pro-adoption. I think we need to be louder and louder and louder for adoption.
Yeah, and first I would say don't let somebody bully you with this sort of assertion that, well, if you haven't adopted somebody, you don't have an opinion. I can't take in every homeless person on the street. You start executing them, and I'm going to object, right? We're allowed to have a say in this, even if we're not able to adopt somebody. But you're right, we need to be able to do this. We probably need to push back on some of these laws that are making it more difficult for Christians to adopt. Are you going to allow this child to change genders if they want to? Well, no. Well, then you can't adopt. That's problematic, right? It does need to be more affordable. But the other thing, aside from us being willing to adopt children, if we're able to provide them with a home, is some of what Heartbeat's doing, which is just giving the women the resources to raise the child, which in a lot of cases is enough to help them choose life. And then also we need to kind of change the whole sexual morals of the country, right? There have been women come out as if they're sticking a thumb in everyone's eye and saying, well, since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, I'm just going to be celibate. Great. Hurt my feelings.
And meanwhile, they look like John Goodman.
Right. But I mean, that is what we would hope. Listen, the whole sexual promiscuity thing results in all these unwanted pregnancies, results in all these abortions. And so if you can't just have an abortion and you therefore are less willing to sleep around, that's good. And the end result is we're going to have fewer unwanted pregnancies, and we're going to need to adopt fewer children because maybe people will behave themselves until they're ready to have a child.
The ease and readiness of availability of abortion is certainly made for sex without consequences. Yeah. Even though there's no such thing. There's no such thing as sex without consequences. And so I think Matt's right. I think, adoption is I think better yet, I do think, imparting restraint and sexual morals on people, where pregnancy is a logical, reasonable consequence of sexual behavior, and that they ought to that ought to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're having these conversations with people. Yes, I would take a firm line on, I don't think there are exceptions to when it's okay to kill a baby. I just don't think that there are. That does not mean we need to be harsh, right? I mean, people have been hurt. Somebody's in this position where they're incredibly scared, and they're being told by everybody that this is the answer. And so I do think that we have to be kind. I think we have to be loving to these people. We have to be on their side, right? The bad guy is the one who attacked you, right? That's the villain in this situation. The child is not the villain. I don't think that having a hard line means that we have to be harsh or uncaring.
Right.
We need to love these
attack
people.
the institution, not the individuals.
Correct. Yeah.
There are people that have had abortions that are wrestling over the guilt of that, and I think we preach grace. Mm-hmm. We preach grace. There's people that have made a mistake that's hurt and harmed their life. It's defined them in so many ways, and I think I think one of the great things that Heartbeat as an organization has done is post-abortive counseling. Look, I'm aware of the statistics. There are people every Sunday, I don't know who, if the statistics hold up, there are people every Sunday in the pews that have had abortions. And grace. We're not gonna compromise our position that it's wrong and life is valuable, but I think they need to be taught. There's grace available in Jesus for that, and you're not defined by your worst moment.
Yeah, and I really do believe. I know we've said it. I really do believe that even in people's individual minds and hearts, that this question would be settled for them the second they realize that really is a baby, right? I mean, right. Even a life of the mother, that's maybe the worst situation we can think. This woman's life is in danger. She's being told. But ask any parent that you know. Point to one of your kids and tell me which one of their lives you'd sacrifice to save your own.
Yep. And, churches are weakening on this.
Kate. Mm-hmm. Right. Correct. And I would argue that that's not an abortion, right? I would argue that that's But it is marked that way, correct. But in that case, the child's life is already, it's a foregone conclusion. And so we should be careful. But yeah, you're right about that.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I've got a book here. I would recommend this to anyone at all who wants to talk about this. It's called What to Say When. This was produced by, I think, a Catholic organization. So they're a little stricter than I might be on any sort of birth control, but this book is fantastic. It's got a ton of information in it about, how to answer and debunk a lot of these pro-abortion arguments. It's got a lot of facts in it. It tells you what abortion does to people. It tells you all the side effects. It tells you how to approach people on these issues. It gives you a bunch of stuff not to say, right? That we have a tendency to put our foot in our mouths when we have these. And the whole thrust of it is, it was right after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and the idea is we're probably not going to solve this problem legally. What we need to do is win people's hearts and minds, and we have an opportunity to do that. And so anyone who's interested, I'll put this up here. You can come look at it, take a picture. As a matter of fact, if you want it and can't afford it, tell me, I'll buy it for you, because it's really good about having these conversations with people from a Christian perspective.
A lot of churches have had a different approach than we have, softening on the issue. And I, if you were to look at like the pregnancy centers, like Heartbeat, like you would look at something like, it's been like pulling teeth sometimes to get churches to be involved and support something like that. It's insane to me. Why churches wouldn't want to be involved? They don't want to take a stand that, on this. Our heels are dug in here. We're on the record. We, aren't apologizing or backing down from that. If that means, I know 99% of people probably appreciate that. But if everybody left, but me, here I stand on that, and I'm willing to die on that hill. And I think, we got some of our elders here. I think our elders are behind that we're willing to die on that hill. And there probably aren't many of those hills that we just universally would make. And so just kind of wrapping up and give you a minute, I think it's time for the church to be vocal, not silent. We don't need to, we can preach the truth in love. This isn't unloving or unkind on that. So now I don't know, like if any of you had any thoughts, we're at 7, but if you had any quick questions or anything, we could maybe deal with 1 or 2, if you do.
Will.
One is the studies have found once a woman sees that child, that their willingness to abort, their abortive mindedness decreases. So I'm all for that. I'm all for anything that would decrease. I don't think that's our end goal. But any law or any legislation that would decrease, there might be even some states that have something similar to that.
I thought they did, because okay. I gotcha. So, but they have to have one technically. And I think that's kind of how Heartbeat gets in, because they said, listen, we'll give you the sonogram that you need for free, and then so that you can go have your abortion, but then they try to keep them from doing it, right? They try to talk them out of that. And so, in Ohio, that is a law.
Yeah, and there's a reason. Every time I've seen one of my children, the word I just go to is wow. That's why. God is amazing. He is, you see the life and you see the design of that, and I'm for that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has made an impact on people. And it's funny, the more that technology has advanced, the more people are making that decision for that exact reason. But I've heard people talk about they've been in situations where they were pregnant and there were other options, and the doctors almost were aggressively pushing abortion, and that wasn't even the best. It's crazy.
And they will push abortion on low risk things. When Stephanie was pregnant with Abby, they'll do these tests. I think Sherry's here, so I got to get my stuff right. But maybe like a protein test on a woman, and that might determine probability or possibility that your child has some type of genetic issue. And so they said the number came out, some type of formula rooted with her age and other factors, and they came up with a number. Right? She's pregnant with Abby. Abby is a 9 or whatever. She has like a 9% chance that she would have Down syndrome, is what it was. And they said, we need to take you to counseling for it. And the first thing they said was, we counsel you to have an abortion on it. We didn't know what, even up to the time of Abby's birth, we didn't know what would, it didn't matter. Obviously she didn't have Down syndrome, but that doesn't matter. Our choice was made up before that.
And it's important to remember this is a business too. Like they are making tons of money on these. $6.7 billion. Yeah. Yes, for a nonprofit, right? That's right. I don't know how many of you have watched the movie Unplanned. This woman who used to be kind of a bigwig in Planned Parenthood came out and blew the whistle on a ton of stuff. If you watch it, be prepared to be angry. But she exposes a ton of there's a strategy. When she said, when we go into these high schools, we talk to these girls, we establish that you can trust us and not your parents, right? You come to us for these sexual matters. And their plan is, by the time they're 20 years old, they've had an abortion or two already. That is the plan. And they openly would tell their employees, this is the strategy. That's not conspiracy theory, foil hat stuff. That's real stuff. So I would recommend that you watch the movie just because it's really informative. She got trashed as being this horrible person for bringing all this stuff out. But or some of these like Project Veritas stings, that they were prosecuted for exposing all this stuff about Planned Parenthood illegally selling products of conception. Somebody released some footage that they got, illegally. They snuck in, and they've got these doctors or technicians back in the room where they have the pieces of these children, and they're dancing them around like puppets and laughing. And I can't imagine anything more evil than that. But that's actual video that was captured. And so there's a lot wrong. And
to show the religious backing behind, the spiritual nature of it, they had, trucks willing to perform abortions at the Democrat National Convention. And they broadcast and prided themselves on the fact that they were giving free abortions. Why? Is that reproductive? They openly wanted to murder children as a part of their party platform, just to stick it to the other side. That should bother us, I think.
And just kind of you could watch these video montages of the day after Roe v. Wade was overturned, these people weeping. And just imagine being so deluded and lied to that you would cry because fewer children are going to be killed, right? I mean, that's our culture's in a weird place, to be sure. And I really do think, I pray that this is going to be something that in 100 years they're going to look back and be like, they were butchers, because that will mean that it's over, right? I hope that's true. Brenda? Yes. They should be. Oh, okay. Yeah. But you're right, they should be wise to that. And still, I believe that minorities make up the largest percent of abortions that are done. They should realize that, and they don't, and it's kind of crazy to me that they don't. And it's funny, Margaret Sanger, you bring her up, they don't want to talk about her. It's kind of like if you're talking to, like a Mormon, and they really don't want to talk about Joseph Smith. They're like, no, we don't talk about him, right? Because he started the whole thing, and he's a mess, and they really don't want to talk about her. But well, those genes, if you want to put it that way, are still deeply embedded in that organization, and that is still part of their desire. Obviously, we can't get to. I mean, there's a million questions we could ask about this. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. And the Hebrew midwives in Egypt were put in that same scenario, and those that Herod with the butcher of the innocents were too. Look, I don't know what it's like to have a moral dilemma like that. I don't know what that's like, but I think in those instances, as Christians, we should be willing to die for that. And I can't speak in everyone's situation. I don't know what's it's easy to preach what you should do till you're faced with that. But it's complicated for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to be gracious with people and be kind and forgiving and so. Oh, my daughter has a question. Hi, hey, you're over there. Correct. I would agree with that. It's very strange because there's been this whole thing of like no uterus, no opinion, right? No man is allowed to have an opinion on abortion, except for all the ones who originally passed Roe versus Wade and all the ones who have passed all the pro-abortion laws. Those ones are allowed to have an opinion about abortion, but not if you disagree with abortion. So yeah, it's kind of silly. Yes, I do agree with that. I think that because the child is every bit as much the man's as it is the woman's. If this does affect men, at least half the babies who are aborted are men, and so it affects those ones for sure. This is not an issue that only affects women. I do think that's silly. Also, to your point about, it takes two people to get pregnant, I think you've made your choice with your body. You did the thing that you got pregnant, and so, unless you've been actually raped or whatever, I get that. But in most cases, the overwhelming percentage of these cases, you made your choice with your body, and now you're pregnant. And so there's already a child. I'm not ready to be a mother. Too late. You are, right? You are a mother right now. You are a father right now. And so we can't, just kill the child. So, what is it, 7:15? So, yeah, there's so many questions. I think we've kind of laid out, what our basic position is. And so some of these more nuanced arguments, if you have more stuff to ask, I hope you're having these conversations with each other and sharpening each other. Come ask us. I know I can point you to a bunch of different resources if you're interested in that. I'm happy to give you anything I've put together, to teach this stuff. You can have it, look over it if it helps you to have these conversations. I would recommend getting this book if you'll read it. It's pretty short, but it's really packed with good stuff. And let's keep this going. We hope this will be a conversation starter rather than the entirety of it. You got anything else? All right. I think we can close in prayer here. Father God, as always, we're so humbled to be allowed to be here together in your presence, to come before you. We're so thankful that we can discuss these things, that you've given us the ability to reason these things out. You've given us your word so that we can make firm and solid moral decisions. Not every single thing is spelled out word for word in the scriptures, and yet you've given us principles to live by that we can apply broadly. And there's probably none much more simple than this one, that you value life, that you love children, you love innocent life, that you've formed us, and that you want these lives to be protected. And it's up to those of us who have a voice and who have the strength to stand up and protect those who don't. Pray that you'd help us to be kind and loving, knowing that people have been deceived in this culture, that they've been lied to now for 50, 60 years, and that we just need to overcome a lot of things in order to convince people of the truth. And so help us to do that with wisdom and with compassion and kindness and love. Help us to convict people with the gospel, knowing that becoming a Christian and having your Spirit living within us is one of the ways that you transform our minds and that we begin to truly become the people you want us to be. Pray that you'd be with those who are struggling with these decisions, that you would help them to choose life. Be with those like Heartbeat and other organizations who are on the front lines of this issue, and just help us to go out and really start to provide some clarity to people who desperately need the light of your word applied. It's in these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.